The Kawhi Leonard situation just keeps getting worse for the Los Angeles Clippers. At this point, I'm not really sure where things go, but today's video is all about that for the Clippers, what to expect for them from this season, how things could potentially look if Kawhi isn't there to begin the season, and much more. I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure you stick around and subscribe to the Basketball Bulletin for more content like this. Post down below what your thoughts are on this topic as we dive in. So earlier, if you didn't hear it, Shams reported that Clipper star Kawhi Leonard underwent a procedure on his knee in the offseason. Sources tell me and Law Murray, the NU. The franchise said today Leonard will be limited to strengthening his knee to start Clippers training camp, but team officials are optimistic about his progress. And this is on the heels of an earlier report this offseason, where Kawhi actually withdrew from Team USA. After all signs looking like things were a go, Shams reported back all the way on July 10th that Kawhi is withdrawing from Team USA for the Paris Olympics and will be replaced. Sources tell him and Joe Varden, Boston's Derek White is a strong candidate to replace Leonard on Team USA. And the reporting around his decision to withdraw at that time or be removed, whichever way you want to look at it, was pretty interesting. So all the way back then, Team USA and Kawhi made the decision to withdraw from the 2024 Olympics due to game speed concerns, per Shams. Coaches said he is performing well while ramping up to full speed for the Olympics, but Leonard and the U.S. team decided his knee, which caused him to miss the last 8 games of the regular season, and most of the Clippers' first-round playoff series against the Dallas Mavericks would not allow him to play at the speed necessary in what was expected to be a hard-fought Olympic tournament. The Clippers and the NBA were also concerned Leonard could do further damage to his knee this summer and put his status for the start of the regular season in jeopardy when the Clippers opened their $2 billion Into a Dome arena, the source said. But teams are not permitted to prevent players from competing for their countries in the Olympics, so this was ultimately a decision made by Leonard and Team USA. So it seems like they agreed to mutually part ways, but there's a lot of interesting things in this dialogue here where they talk about how this all could have put him in jeopardy for the start of the season, and in hindsight, obviously things went well for Team USA. I'm not worried about that aspect of it, but it's interesting how we still wound up here. Knee surgeries are always a tricky, touchy thing, and Kawhi is somebody that is at a point where I'm not so sure if he's going to come back as himself or what even normal Kawhi Leonard is at this point as he gets older and his body continues to fail him. But, typically seeing this type of stuff is not a good thing, and he did have a procedure here. So you could be optimistic like the franchise is and say, okay, hopefully this time is the time where Kawhi is healthy, he's good, he's able to sustain through the season, and we can make a deep run with him. And while I do like the way that they retooled this offseason, I think that if you are the Clippers, you also have to be realistic about where your chances lie and what your goals are. I think for them, their goal is probably somewhere along the lines of just remaining competitive to help sell tickets and get butts in seats for the brand new arena, which is perfectly reasonable and makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, losing Paul George and with the consistent issues that he and Kawhi were having in terms of health, and obviously James Harden is no stranger to health issues sometimes, I don't know what their ceiling would have been anyway. I mean, we've talked about for the last 5 years the Kawhi Leonard Clippers and how they could potentially, if healthy, if all things break the right way, make a deep playoff push. It feels like, to me, just personally, regardless of Paul George, it feels like that ship may have sailed at this point. And so when you look at their current roster, we have Mo Bamba, Batum, Kobe Brown, Cam Christie, Amir Coffey, Ray J, Dennis, my boy Ray J, Chris Dunn. He's not my boy. I don't know him at all. Trent Flowers, James Harden, EJ Harkless, Bones Highland, Kai Jones, Derek Jones, Kawhi, Terrence, Jordan Miller, Kevin Porter Jr., Norman Powell, PJ Tucker, and Zubac. So when you look at this roster and you subtract Kawhi Leonard from it, you really only have a few different things that are pretty interesting here. First and foremost, I do like this retooled Clipper roster where they have a bit of a defensive identity here with guys like Mo Bamba, Derek Jones. I also like the potential of some other guys that are here that are a bit younger, like Kai Jones and like Kevin Porter. But they also do have, in those two guys, some extremely unpredictable personalities that I'm not so sure they'd be able, and also you add in Bones Highland in terms of that too. I'm not so sure how they rein all of those guys in. And ultimately, you look at this roster, it almost feels feels like they might as well just pivot towards trying to do a rebuild at this point. They've got some straggler older guys like PJ Tucker, Norman Powell's at 31. You got Kawhi, you got James Harden, Nick Batum, but everyone else is basically 30 and below aside from Chris Dunn, who's even at 30. It almost feels like they might as well pivot to a rebuild. So ultimately, that's obviously not a decision that they want to make and that they're going to do. But ultimately, they chose, I guess, the wrong time to get their arena built and have that be something that they're trying to get butts in seats for. However, if you are a Clippers fan, I think there are a couple of nice things here that you could potentially be optimistic about. But again, optimistic within reason. What's the ceiling here? If Kawhi, they're saying they're optimistic that he'll be here for the start of the season, sure. But if he misses, a couple of weeks, a month, if he has any sort of setback or anything like that, because one thing we know is Kawhi is not getting on that floor until he feels 100% ready. That is something I do not criticize him for. I think that's perfectly fine. Some people idolize other players and people that would put their body in jeopardy. I have no opinions or thoughts that way or the other way. And that if you want to do that, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. I think that playing when you feel comfortable in terms of like your body, that is really important. And nobody knows your body like you. That's my thoughts on it. So all in all, I think if you're a fan of the Clippers, you have a couple things to be optimistic about. For one, like I said, I do like the defensive identity there. I think that with the right system, they could be a really fun team to watch within reason. With Kawhi maybe missing some games, you're probably looking at low 40s, maybe at that point. I think the thing about this West Conference is that all the teams are going to be in that 40s, mid 40s, high 40s, low 50s range. So you're going to be at a point where like one or two games here or there in terms of like how many wins you have is going to either propel you into the playoffs. If you're somebody that's like 46, 47, 48, you probably are making the playoffs flat out, right? And one or two wins may or may not be the difference between being 11th seed or 7th seed, like that's kind of where the West is. And so for the Clippers, it sounds a little bit worse than what I'm saying, but they're right in that mix regardless, I think. And one thing that I said I really like is the defensive identity, but I want to circle back to James Harden here. I think a lot of what they could potentially be really, really rests on James Harden here. So talking about Harden, I'm not the biggest Harden fan. Unfortunately for me, he kind of got on my bad side with all the foul baiting earlier in his career. It was really bad for a while. I think even his staunchest defenders couldn't admit that. I just noticed that my green screen's going crazy. I'm sorry about that. I'll have to fix that next time. But I do think that some of the numbers for him are a little bit of fool's gold in terms of like, this is not Harden now. 16-5-9, that's not Harden now. I think he still could give you at least 22 and 10. I think he can still do that. And if you look at his career year over year, I think that is also suggested by the numbers. Now, here's the thing about Harden's production now. His first step was one of the main reasons he was able to dominate so heavily for that like 6-year stretch that he had. Actually, it's a little bit longer than that, isn't it? It's actually like 7-8 years. Harden was pretty crazy. 36 points, 30 points, etc. His first step is nowhere near what it was. He started getting, I think, some hamstring injuries, I think is what it was. And he can't blow by people the way that he used to. And so that is obviously one of the main reasons why his offense has taken a dip. But again, he's not at I'm 16 points per game Harden right now. I think he's still got a couple years left where if he is asked to, he can perform much better for you. And I think that the reason why the numbers have dipped is multifaceted. First and foremost, field goal attempts are down. He's at 11.4 last year, guys. He took 11 shots per game last year. And it's not that weird thing where they're like, not counting the shots that you got fouled on. He took 5 free throws per game last year. Also, he played 72 games. He played 34 minutes a game. Basically, Harden was out there just to be out there. He was just moving the ball. And if you look at the roster that they had last year with guys like Kawhi, PG, Russ, it's like there's kind of a lot of hands there. So I can understand that. So I do think that you can get more out of Harden, especially with the ball in his hands. I'm not expecting him to go back to being 30 points, 35, 36 point per game Harden. I don't think he has that in him because, like I just said, the first step thing is real. But I do think that this team can stay afloat under the assumption that Kawhi's gone for, I don't know, a couple of weeks or something into the season. I think that this team can stay afloat if Harden can give them 25 and 12. I think he could do that for at least a couple of weeks. And if you look at the last few years here for him, basically since he left Houston with, you remember the fat suit and all that stuff. And then he basically was like, I just need to be traded after that Lakers game, that last game that he played in Houston. He played 10 games for Houston that season. He shifted to Brooklyn that year. And then this is just regular season numbers as well, guys. But at that point, he shifted to being more of a pass-first kind of player, kind of, right? Still gave you 24, but 11 assists. I think that was a really, really underrated part of the way that Harden has transformed. And he's basically been playing that role ever since. I mean, he had a couple of years prior where he was really close. Like, he had a 29-11 season up here in 16-17. That's crazy production, right? But he's basically been at 24-10, 24-11, 10-22. Like, he's been there. So to see him go from literally last year prior, the year prior, 22-23 with Philadelphia, go from that 21-11 to 16-8 or 16-9 if you round up, that's a huge dip. Like I said, there's a lot of layers to this, and I think a lot of it's just lack of opportunity. So with opportunity there, he may be able to give you 27. I'm not sure. But that will be more or less just in an attempt to keep them afloat. And I do think that he could do that. Like I said, I'm not the biggest James Harden fan, but I think that the numbers suggest that there's more in the tank for Harden. And last year is a bit of an anomaly and not what you would expect going forward for him. And he is a bit older at 35, but I think that his skill set still can lend itself to, being able to produce that way. So I want to give him some props for the way that he adjusted his game and has basically, like I said, been playing the point guard role ever since and adapted ultimately. So that's been a huge thing for him. It's, I think, prolonged him, because if he was still heavily reliant on free throws and shot attempts, 20 points, 20 shots per game, 22, 25, whatever it is, then maybe it would be a bit more of a decline. But I think this has kind of prolonged him a little bit. What do you think on that personally down below? Lastly, I wanted to take a look at the Clippers' first few games here, just again, under the assumption that Kawhi actually does miss some time. So they start the season versus Phoenix, then they play Denver, then they play Golden State. Okay. So a couple question marks there with Phoenix and Golden State, maybe a little bit with Denver too, to be honest. But these very well could be, they could either go 1-2 or 0-3, or if they get a hot shooting night, 3-0. I mean, they could very reliably win several of these games here. I'd probably say they go 2-1 in this stretch. I think that they probably match up pretty well with Phoenix. And Golden State's an interesting one. I'd like to see that matchup. They might mess around and lose that game too. Denver, I think, is going to be a tough one for them with Joker, assuming that Jamal plays like, I don't know, freaking Jamal Murray and not whoever the heck we saw over the last few months here. But then they move over to Portland. Then they play Phoenix again. Oklahoma City, San Antonio here, Philadelphia. They've got a really mixed bag schedule here. It's like all good teams except for Portland mixed in there. So really interesting here. It's going to be a tall order, a tall task to see them kind of stay afloat in this stretch if Kawhi does miss any period of time. Because even if they could sneak around and win, like I mentioned, those first few games, maybe they win a couple of those games in that first 3-game period, they're probably losing most of the games between Portland and Toronto here. So that's a really, really tough stretch for them. But ultimately, though, it's going to be interesting to see. I hope you guys enjoy. Like I said, make sure you subscribe to the Basketball Bulletin. We're trying to grow this channel before the NBA season starts. And you guys are going to definitely love the video that's on the screen right now. So make sure you click it before you go.
Hey, hey, hey.